This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. This is Razib with the Unsupervised Learning podcast, and I am here with Sean Trende of RealClearPolitics. So I think you probably know just from that affiliation what Sean does. But actually, Sean, could you just give us like a quick bio sketch of your education, background, where you grew up and stuff so people know where you're from? I mean, I can read it myself, but, it's on a Wikipedia page.
Oh, gosh, it's my dad was in the Air Force, so just places I grew up could take up a 10-minute stretch. But I went to high school in Oklahoma, went to Yale and got a bachelor's degree in history and poli-sci, took a few years off and went to Duke to get my J.D., practiced law for a little while, and then switched over here to RealClearPolitics. Along the way, I picked up a Ph.D. in political science from Ohio State and a master's in applied statistics. So I've spent way too much time in higher education.
Yeah, me too. I mean, so I hear you. I'm actually, I don't like talking about what I do for my day job, but let's just say it's not related to what I did my PhD in. Although, some of the stuff on my Substack obviously is. So I guess like the first thing I just want to get out of the way, because we're recording right after the November 4th election. And, it was basically a wipeout from what I can tell for Republicans. They were not necessarily favorites to win the governor's races in New Jersey or Virginia, but they lost really badly. So can you talk about like what your like general take a couple of days afterwards is?
Yeah, I mean, there aren't many elections where you just can't find good news for the losing party. Like usually there's something like they won a Senate race and the best I can come up with is they held on to the Nassau County legislature. Because other than that, it was just a blowout across the board. Yeah, you expect them to lose in New Jersey, but they'd hoped to keep it close. Maybe a sign it was becoming a swing state, double digits. They'd hoped that in Virginia they could, keep it reasonably close-ish and win the attorney general's race. And the Democratic attorney general's candidate did better than Kamala Harris, despite having some of the worst on-tape experiences I've ever seen before. So it was bad. Everywhere you looked, it was bad for Republicans.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jay Jones, the attorney general candidate in Virginia, he had the scandal of where, he had fantasies of killing his enemies and children, and he won,
Yeah, and it wasn't even like a nuanced thing. It was right there in text messages, and the recipient was like, you can't really mean that. Like, and he's like, no, that's how change happens, is through pain. And it was like, oh, okay, you're crazy. We won by 7 points, so it's bad for Republicans.
Yeah, and so my general take, and I'm not like a political professional like you, and I should say that are you still involved with the Almanac of American Politics?
I haven't written that in a long time. I got my redistricting book in 2014, and so that was kind of the big feather in the cap, and since then I haven't done much with it.
Okay. I mean, I used to read that back in the 1990s when I was a kid, back before the internet was a thing. Couldn't just look up every district. So, my general take is, being in business, and just like, knowing a little bit about the temperature and like how many people are looking for jobs. I think a lot of, my personal opinion is a lot of it is just like the main effect is probably just economics. It is the economy. Obviously, there are other things going on, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's two things. It's the economy, but it's some specific parts of the economy. I mean, Trump was elected to, day one, going to bring down prices. And instead, he immediately goes into a trade war, which has the opposite effect of raising prices. And to the extent there are any benefits from tariffs, they're like down the road, right? Like it takes a long time for jobs to shift, if that even happens. And I think the other thing is people they don't really like chaos. They'll put up with it for a while when it's like, okay, he's getting things done. Like, we like things to be moving in Washington, but after a while, they just get tired of the nonstop back and forth and craziness and drama. And so I think some of that is built in to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why Biden was elected in 2020. Just because people are exhausted, and I mean, I personally lean to the right, but I do have to say, I'm a normal person. Like, I would rather just grill and not have to think about the circus. And whatever you say about Trump, and just candidly, I do agree with a lot of his domestic policy in particular. I'm not a big fan of the tariffs. I think everyone knows this who follows me on Twitter, but it's a lot of drama, and it's just like. Sometimes I just want to like have a normal life and think about my normal job and my normal books and whatever, and not like wonder what's going on in DC because there's something big, And I don't think I'm the only person.
Yeah, in his first term, I think it was people got tired of waking up in the morning and like, okay, what did he tweet overnight? Like, are we at war with Greenland now? This term, like I said, I think there was a sense with Doge and some of those other things that, yeah, it's a little chaotic, but it seems like he's making progress. Like, this isn't just stupid stuff he's tweeting about. But after a while, it's exactly what you say. Like, most Americans, it's hard. I think it's easy to get lost in the Twitter nonsense and realize that most Americans don't know who the main character on Twitter is any given day. And like you said, they just want to go out and grill and have dinner with their friends and not have to worry that, they don't want everything to devolve into a political conversation, which tends to happen during the Trump presidency.
Yeah, and I think a lot of his base, or just like the Republican base, also, there's some social science evidence that politics has become kind of a religion for a particular group of liberal upper middle class, professionals. But I don't think that it's normally not that central to the lives of conservative or Republican Americans. Like, they have other things going on, their churches and, the PTA, their organizations, and, tend to have like a higher rate of family formation. So I think, I think that's a little bit at cross purposes. Was there anything that surprised you? I mean, I guess maybe the magnitude of the wins were a little more than like what the betting markets and, what the experts and stuff you're saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, there did seem to be a break at the end towards Democrats, and I started to think that Jay Jones, might pull across the finish line. But I was shocked that he won by 6 or 7 points. I really thought, because we had seen some pretty consistent polling in New Jersey showing it, a low single-digit race. I didn't think it was going to end up, Cheryl by 13 or whatever it's trending towards.
Wow. Yeah.
And then, I mean, there's just, when you really dig down, it's like, Democrats won 2 statewide offices in Georgia with 60% of the vote. That is, amazing. One of them was a black woman, which, whatever you can say about Georgia, like, I did not. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, black woman Democrat wins by double digits, 20 points in Georgia, I would have said, you're crazy. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court retention elections, like 60% for the Democrats. Like, it wasn't the direction of things so much as, like you say, just the magnitude of it, like Republicans just getting obliterated.
Yeah. What do you think about Zohran Mamdani? He barely won over 50%, but he got over 50%, which means that probably wouldn't have mattered if Lee was in the race or not. On the other hand, it's a pretty small win for a Democrat. So, I don't know if there's like world-shaking consequences for the rest of the country.
Yeah, it's, Mamdani, again, when I look at it, I'm like, wow, someone who, may actually, talks about seizing the means of production, won the mayorship of New York City. Like, that's a big deal. On the other hand, then I have to step back and, like we said before, take it from the point of view of someone who knows nothing about politics following this. Like, Mamdani is a charismatic guy. He had a great ad team. I mean, there was an SNL sketch kind of making fun of him for smiling in response to everything. But, like, I gotta say, like, the guy's got a nice smile. It seems like it would be fun to hang out and have a beer with him sometime. So I think it's perhaps a little less alarming than, someone who's center right, who's really dialed into politics might think. But, and like you said, a Democrat gets a majority of the vote in New York City. Like, it's kind of a dog bites man. I mean, you expect them to win.
Yeah, yeah. My friend Zeneb Rabua, by the time this will have posted, I will have posted the podcast. Should be posting today, actually, as we're recording. She has this thesis that Mamdani is best understood as a third world, like, post-colonial type of candidate. He does have he has a third culture kid background. Okay, so I mean, he came to the United States, I think, when he was 7. Between lived in, visited India a lot, where his mom's from. His dad's from Uganda. Spent time in Uganda. He goes back and forth. Got naturalized relatively late. And he speaks all these languages. He's married to a woman of Syrian American heritage. All this stuff. And then you have, I think Scott Greer wrote in the American Conservative that basically you just need to think of him as just woke. There's no complicated, third world, whatever. What is your general analysis of what he represents, if he represents anything?
Yeah, it's hard. I generally try to stay away from super wonky, deep in the weeds responses, but it's really hard, I think, with him. I think he is squarely in the sort of there's this strain in academia that's like a combination of Frankfurt School critical studies, 20th century Marxism, postmodern thinking, kind of, questioning whether there's any type of absolutes, and then cultural studies, which is really what woke comes out of. And I just think he's squarely within that. I mean, his father is a cultural anthropologist. That is woke central. Whether you want to call it woke or radical social justice or whatever, I agree. I think that's what he is he is the epicenter of that. And it's going to be interesting to see him in power.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, I live in Austin, Texas. I'm sad for New York City, but I'm anticipating more new friends from the Big Apple.
Yeah, it's going to be, obviously people threaten to leave all the time, and there's limits on his ability to actually do some of the tax and spend that he's threatened to do, because it has to get signed off by Democrats in Austin. But at the same time, he has a potential to be very radical and unsettling to a lot of, especially wealthy residents in New York City. So I'm curious whether there's a flight from New York or not.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the final question about Zorhan Mamdani is, can I ask you, what do you think about the whole Palestine issue and whether it galvanized people, turned people off? I mean, this seems to have blown up over the last couple of years after 10/7 in Israel as a central, central organizing issue on the left. And he's obviously, if he has sincere beliefs that he's not going to move on, I think one of the sincere beliefs is he is a, shall we say, skeptic of the state of Israel.
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes hand in glove with what we were talking about, that, what he is at his core is this kind of, radical social justice / kind of critical cultural studies believer. And you look at post-colonial theory, and Israel is ground zero for that. So I think there's someone pointed out one of his ads, if you looked in the background, the only flag that was hanging in the background of his ad was a Palestinian flag. And that's not something that happens by accident. I think he is all in on people of Palestine are a oppressed group, and Israel is a colonial power in the same way that any other colonial power occupying indigenous territory would be. I'm using kind of his verbiage, not necessarily mine, but or what would be his verbiage. I think that is sincere, and I think it's deeply held.
Okay, all right. So let's move a little bit more broad in terms of just the scope and the timing. So we're having coalitions. In the United States, obviously Republicans and Democrats are both coalitions. The coalitions have changed in the 21st century. So I think I read Andrew Gellman's Red State, Blue State. I think it was came out around 2008, 2007, something like that. 2008,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah.
And one of the things in that book was it was kind of a rebuttal to What's the Matter with Kansas, which was written about how working class people, particularly working class whites, I think were voting against their interests. And, Gelman showed that in a lot of the country, especially in the South, but a lot of the country, there was still a strong correlation between your income and voting Republican, because Republicans were the class of, the professional class. They were the professional class party, the party of wealth, et cetera, et cetera. But there were some signals, which, I think What's the Matter with Kansas and other people were kind of like tapping into in terms of what the Republican and the Democratic elites were signaling to people. And then that didn't really go anywhere in the 2012 election, where when Romney was nominated, but obviously it changed a lot since Trump has been nominated. And so now, we have somewhat different coalitions, probably an amplification of earlier trends, right? What is your general, how would you explain to someone who doesn't follow politics, know any of this stuff? Like, what has happened between, say, I don't know, the year 2000 and 2024? Because year 2000 election was a big election. It's still like a big part of our history with Gore versus Bush. But a lot of things have changed, haven't they?
Yeah, I would take it back a few more to 1988, because that was an election where we had a strong class cleavage in America, where working class voters voted for Democrats, wealthy white voters voted for Republicans. And it just kind of, Bill Clinton, I think, particularly started to bring that kind of managerial class, the upper middle class, over into the Democratic coalition. And it was just kind of this slow burn. And as the Democratic coalition got more and more of these upper class whites, its policies started more and more to reflect their views, especially on culture war issues. And I think it just kind of broke. I think if you look at the Democratic nominees, they, just the progression, like from Clinton to Gore to Kerry to Obama, they become more and more emblematic of kind of that highly educated mindset on cultural issues. And I think it just kind of snapped in 2016 with Donald Trump kind of ironically coming in as the avatar of working class sensibilities, and Hillary Clinton going the other way. So yeah, if you look at the 2024 exit polls, there was almost no differentiation by economic class. It's fascinating. I mean, it's not there. And if you look at wealthy congressional districts, they tend to be represented by Democrats overwhelmingly. So we have seen this kind of reshuffling of the traditional political coalitions.
Yeah, I'll tell you a really weird story about when I realized something was changing. I was at a friend's party, and I used to be in academia. I work in tech now, so I hang out with a certain type of person, right? And this friend, he works in I'll just say he works in with liqueurs and stuff like that, right? And so there was more class diversity, I would say, at this party. It was alcohol, beverages, whatever. So I was talking to this woman. This was 2016, the summer of 2016, and we're just talking about I randomly was just talking about politics, and this is Austin, Texas, so I'm more Republican, I would say, so I'm usually in the minority, and so I just kind of gingerly asked what she thought, and I'll just tell you, turned out she was a stripper, and she was very big on Trump, really big on Trump, and I was just like, I think I can't model what's going on here.
So I think about it. There's this strain of kind of FU in American politics, and especially in working class culture. And so what I do, I think back to the heavy metal bands of the 80s. There's that famous video of Lemmy, the lead singer of Motorhead, giving a middle finger with a scowl on his face to the camera. And so in the 80s, if that's your worldview, you're definitely a Democrat. You don't care for the religious right. You don't care for the moralism of the Republicans. But today, I think that kind of, and so this kind of gets into the stripper idea, being kind of on the outside, outcast morally from America, not really liking preachiness of anyone. That's Donald Trump. If anything, the Clinton and Harris and Biden coalition are moral scolds, which is weird again.
Yeah. No, that's there's some paradoxes, because the old religious right is now firmly in the Trump coalition, but I mean, if you're evangelical Protestant, you go to church every Sunday. I mean, Trump is clearly at most a cultural Christian.
Yeah.
like we're kind of in a situation where, I mean, between Biden and Trump, like Biden was arguably probably by most normal metrics of religiosity more religious.
Yeah.
Trump is obviously has some affinity to Christianity, but some of the things he said indicate that he is not the most devout person privately.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the religious right has changed during our lifetimes. Like during the Reagan years, like it was pushing the culture war forward. Like, and I think today it views itself in a defensive posture. Like it's not necessarily we're going to go with Donald Trump because we like it and we think he's going to fight for us. It's wow, like the Democrats shut down our churches during COVID and kept them shut down after we had vaccines. Like they don't like us. And I think that's really where a lot of the religious right comes from. And I think even people on the secular left see that or the secular right see that as well. Like I think you look at a lot of the new atheists from like the 2000s and they are like at least Republican curious. Because it's more like, okay, we didn't really like the religious right in power, but we didn't want them obliterated by the state either. And I think there's that reaction as well. I imagine you have strong feelings on that, but I've read your bio.
Yeah, I mean, so I have friends actually. So my friend Colin Wright, Colin Wright's like little like chart where there's like a person who's like on the center left, and and there's a guy laughing. That guy laughing is me. Like that's literally me, because I told him in 2018, I was like, I'm pretty sure you're going to be a Republican. And he was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, and I told that to James Lindsay too, actually. So like, these guys they're coming out of like the new atheist background. And like, the thing is like, this isn't everybody, because some of the new atheists, some of these, they became very woke, became the woke schools, but others are always like a little too heterodox, I think. Just a little too iconoclastic to just like bend to whatever. And so, for example, I think like for a lot of them, the trans stuff was just like, okay, like, candidly, a lot of people don't really understand it even now after like a decade of explanation and education and stuff like that. And so if you don't think it's a coherent concept, you're going to call it out on that. But if that's like a problem with your political faction, you're going to be on the outs. And that's clearly what happened, right? And so, Colin now is, he is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and I actually was pushing for that as far back as 2019, and he votes Republican now, just like as I predicted, and it's just because things have changed. On the other hand, to be fair to Trump and the religious right, he did appoint the people that got Roe v. Wade overturned. That was kind of like the white whale for our whole lifetimes, right?
Yeah, I think that's just interesting because, like, then the very next thing he does is get the Republican Party to step back from a national ban and fully embrace the Federalist solution. So I don't know. I think this evolution is absolutely fascinating, and you see it. With the people you mentioned, you see it with like Bill Maher and Ayaan Hirsi Ali and all these other like big figures who all of a sudden are like, okay, maybe it wasn't so much. I mean, it was radical Christianity, but maybe the bigger target was enforced orthodoxy. And it turns out there's other ways. It's like you said, that wokeness is a sort of religion without the deity on the left. It's an enforced code of conduct that's totalizing. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot of the reaction. And that's why, at the end of the day, that's part of why you have strippers voting Republican, because it's like, we don't enforced orthodoxy has never gone well for us. So
yeah. Also, I think to be clear, I also think like talking to that woman, I still remember that conversation. I mean, because look, I live in America in this age, and like people don't, I think, mix it across classes as much in urban areas as when I lived in a small town in Oregon. I'm from Oregon, that was different. But when I talked to her, I think part of it was also just like the celebrity. Like she felt like she knew Donald Trump from The Apprentice and just in the media and stuff like that. And there was like the celebrity attraction. And, obviously, I mean, Hillary Clinton was pretty well known, but she wasn't really a celebrity,
No.
And I think that was part of what drew people. Now we do have like, back, Romney was probably the, kind of like the peak in a way of this three-legged stool of like, hawkish foreign policy, fiscal conservatism, and social conservatism in 2012. And that was the Republican establishment. And that was what Trump kind of, overturned, although like he didn't overturn all of the planks, obviously, but he like tacked to the middle when it came to entitlements, et cetera, et cetera. But those people are still around. Like some of them like have like, at least publicly changed their tune, while others have become, bulwark adjacent, never Trump, all of that stuff. Do you think like within the near future, Trump is going to leave the national scene as a official, political figure?
Right.
Do you think that there is a chance that they could come back, or as you as a political scientist, you've seen like historically these things have changed. Like, are there reversals? Is there a possibility of that, or not? I know that a lot of those old traditional players, like for example, the Bush family, would love everything to be rolled back, right?
Right. So I think there's a group. Maybe it's useful to differentiate between Never Trump and like the anti-Trump crowd. So you have, I think, like the Jonah Goldbergs of the world who have maintained conservatism, but kind of, I don't like Trump. We like the old true conservative. They'll be all in. And I think even if it were someone like Vance or someone who just wasn't as viscerally disliked as Trump, you'll see some coming back. I think the Never Trump folk are an interesting question, because now we're going on 12 years of being kind of out on the outs from the Republican Party, and at a certain point, like, you're just not a Republican anymore. Like you're no longer a dissident Republican; you're a Democrat,
like Bill Kristol.
Like Bill Kristol, exactly. And you can look at how the bulwark has changed over time. Like it's shifted from being Trump Republicans bad to like now they're getting the Pod Save America guys involved, and it's become almost indistinguishable from like the Pod Save America. Maybe a little bit more conservative on some issues, but I think they're just Democrats now.
Okay, like we're both Gen X. For me, the weirdest thing is like someone like Mona Sharon. Okay, like I grew up watching her on these pundit shows, and Mona Sharon was not like a Wall Street Journal business conservative. Yeah. She was pretty. She was maybe not quite Pat Buchanan, but like she was pretty. I don't want to say far right because people think that's pejorative. I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but I'll say she's very conservative.
She was all in.
Now she's at the bulwark, and honestly, because like I said, like I'm not a political professional. I'm not a political analyst. I don't really understand psychologically what's going through her mind, like what her aversion to Trump in particular was. And there's a lot. Trump seems to be particularly repulsive to professional managerial class women.
Yeah.
If I had to say, there's just his affect. It's not just his policies, it's his affect. Like he's just vulgar and crass in a way that they just cannot abide. Right. But to me, it's just kind of shocking to see that, someone who wasn't a squish. She wasn't a squish.
No, so I think I hope he doesn't take this as a call out because I genuinely like him. But like someone like Tim Miller, like I get it. Like, he was a gay Republican, always had kind of like that tension. Libertarian, I can see at a certain point being like, screw it, it's not worth defending anymore. Like I'm going to lean more into these social views. But yeah, someone like Mona Charen or Jay Nordlinger, or these people who are like in the conservative movement, how you become, I would love to sit down and have a conversation because to try to understand like why you become Never Trump bulwark versus, Jonah Goldberg dispatch. Like, okay, we still believe all these conservative things. We're just trying to wait out the Trump era. I don't entirely understand.
Like David Trump is now, basically, his views are not necessarily center left, but like who he associates with. Because I know, like, let's just say that, like, his like cocktail parties in DC are a different crowd than they were 15 years ago. Like, I know that from,
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting to see, like, biographically these big figures transform. I don't think, and I think, like Richard Hanania would say, this elite human capital problem. I don't think the Trump movement is producing quite the same sorts of figures either. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a big picture interesting here with both the Obama. I think Obama and Trump are very similar in that they're celebrity presidencies, albeit for different reasons, right? Like Obama was kind of more of a pop culture. Trump was like a long-standing celebrity. But the parties that they left behind were sort of formed in their images. It was, and it's very difficult. It was very difficult for Democrats to try to reconfigure the Obama magic, and that's part of why they struggled in off-year elections in 2016. I think Republicans have the same thing, that Trump is such a singular figure, and he gets jealous when he has to share the spotlight, that it's not producing. I mean, you see, there's some of it with the, like the rise of like American greatness and,
Yeah.
more serious.
A lot of my Claremont friends have, become all in,
Yeah.
but they're not like figures like Bill Kristol
Right.
or David Frum were, or even
Right.
Pat Buchanan back in the day.
I think it's one thing that was interesting to me, and it made me realize that like I am now on the bad side of generational change, but I'm on the downswing. But I went to the Republican convention and I was wandering around Media Row, and I didn't know any of these people. I was like, who? There'd just be people I never heard of, and yet they would have obviously like $1 million setups, and there was real money behind them. And so like, when I see BuzzFeed Benny Johnson, like,
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh my God. But I do wonder if maybe like someone from the silent generation or the FDR coalition looked at, William F. Buckley and was like, who is this kid? Like, who's that snot-nosed brat? Maybe there is a deeper meaning to Benny Johnson or, Charlie Kirk, rest his soul, that I couldn't see. And maybe others,
Well, I think you're pointing out something actually. I think you nailed something that probably is relevant. We are going from we're transitioning from a period of like, first of all, centralized broadcast news in the 20th century, but also print figures were very dominant. George Will, for example, William Safire on the left, there were their own equivalent figures. Charlie Kirk, he did write things and he definitely tweeted things, but really he was more of a extemporaneous speaker, and even someone like, say, Ben Shapiro, who's obviously a big influencer. He's really smart. If he wanted to focus on writing, and he has written books, like he could write, like there's no doubt about that. But what is he known for? More like his like a mile a minute podcasting, and so I think part of it is maybe like a shift in the medium, and there's not going to be figures like David Frum writing in National Review, like a piece like about unpatriotic conservatives that is like transformative in the movement anymore. It's going to be, some podcaster or some YouTuber. I don't know.
No, like I'd heard of Charlie Kirk, but I really didn't understand like who he was or what he did. Now my sons, they knew him. I have 3 boys. One has autism, but the other 2 are 14 and 11, and like, they knew exactly what he was and what he did and could like cite some of the things he'd said. So I think just because he's invisible, these people are invisible to us, they're still major figures in ways we don't appreciate.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. Like, Charlie was not invisible to me. Like, I kept track of him, and I knew about the Groyper Wars, and I am friends with one of his producers, and there was talk about me going on and talking about genetics on his show. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But in all candor, I kind of thought he was a lightweight. I mean, I'm not saying that in a pejorative way, but I was just like, okay, like he's just kind of an entertainer, kind of an impresario. But after his passing and how like he, first of all, like he was assassinated. I mean, that's a big deal. That's going to like get attention. But I realized, oh, he like touched people in a deeper way than I had realized, and I think that's partly because I'm older, and I don't see these sorts of like video performances as quote unquote serious, but like
No, I saw. I'll say I watched the because everyone was inundated by like his greatest hits on Twitter with things, and like there were a couple points he made was I was like, wow, I've never thought of that before. That's a really clever argument. So there was a seriousness, and I think in a lot of ways, in the same way that like Buckley and Goldwater changed the minds of a lot of kind of college aged baby boomers. I think he was doing the same thing, and so I think there are others in that vein, like you said, Shapiro, and in his own way, maybe Benny Johnson. Just because he doesn't speak to me doesn't mean he's not influential, I guess.
Yeah. We got to be aware of that. So I want to kind of alluding to our age a little bit. I had a discussion online, one of my group chats, and a younger friend. I just say he's like, it was like 33, 34, like mid 30s, and he said something about this was like a month ago, about the potential permanent majority. And I'm like, bro, that's not going to happen. He's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm not going to argue with it. It's just not going to happen. I'm like, look, I'm old. Like, I've remembered many permanent majorities. I remember the permanent majority before 1994 of the Democrats in the House. I remember the permanent majority after 2008 of the Democrats. I remember the permanent majority of 2004 of the center-right nation of the Republicans. I mean, these permanent majorities come and go. And so, why do people... I mean, you're a political scientist, so that this is just not going to happen. Why do people talk about permanent majorities when? I mean, why are they so short-sighted? I don't get it.
Yeah. So, my book is actually about this, the lost majority, which last I checked, you can get on Amazon Marketplace for 2 cents. But that was the whole thing. Was I wrote it. This is a true story. So it was originally going to be co-written between me and Jay Cost, and we had like a big name agent. We pitched it to 10 publishers, and all 10 rejected it because all 10 were like, there's no way Republicans are coming back from this. This was in 2009. I finally got picked up in 2000. The other author gave up and Jay Cost did something different, but I stuck with it and finally, and it was absolutely right. Like, the reasons, I guess, to answer your question is that, like, I think people just want to believe, right? Like, if you're deep in the movement and you're convinced of your righteousness, when you see someone with your viewpoint do well, the kind of self-satisfied answers, okay, the country has finally seen the light, right? Like, the battle's over. Like, people have heard this argument and they finally agree with me. And since I'm right, there's no way things will ever turn back. Yeah, I think that's the mentality at the core of it. Is just like, I want to believe that everyone else has come to see things like me.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess that's one of the benefits of just living through history, right? You saw it. It's $2.99 on the Kindle. I just got it, so I'm gonna check a historical artifact of 2012, right? Or a period.
Yeah.
It's interesting to read, books of politics and history that are written in a specific period, and then you can kind of know what happened, and that's just it's an interesting experience. So now I want to ask you a little bit about just the structure of the parties and stuff like that. Matt Iglesias and Ezra Klein and other people have talked about the groups and the staffing problem with the Democrats, and one thing that I have noticed, and I have friends who are, believe it or not, Democratic operatives. I mean, David Shore was on my podcast 4 years ago now, I guess. So, I know David. I think I can say that without getting him canceled now. But, but, it seems like the Democratic staffing class is dominated by women and gay men. Okay. And so, is that your impression? Have you heard this sort of thing? In terms of so for example, okay, I'll tell you, during the Biden administration, during the infrastructure build up, there was a whole thing in the media about all these shovel ready projects are going to these white blue collar men, and that's problem with equity, blah blah blah. And I'm just like, have you ever walked by a construction site and there's no white guys there. They're mostly Latino, you know what I'm saying? So it's okay, these people are just they're not in that world. They don't know, and they have their stereotypes and preconceptions, right? And so what do you think about the Democrats' staffing issues, and can they overcome it? Do they have a staffing issue? Is it just something they're gonna have to deal with? And then I would also want to ask about Republicans, but I'll talk about later.
Yeah, so I think you ask yourself about I think there's two things that go into that. First off, especially among younger Americans, the most progressive voting blocks are single women, and sexual minorities. And so it sort of makes sense that the people who want to give their lives over to politics are going to be drawn from that group. And that's combined with we talked earlier about Mamdani and kind of the intellectual developments and theories that he comes out of. Like all these Democratic staffers that go to elite universities and major in various fill in the blank studies programs, like all they learn is that worldview, right? Like the cultural studies, critical theory, postmodernism, melons that's come out of them. And so if you're 24 years old and you have learned about decolonization and you've learned about, fighting back against the patriarchy in all of your college classes, and you now have your taste of power, of course that's how you're going to pursue things. And the problem is that most Americans do not come out of that worldview. Most Americans are still like small L liberals. They believe in tolerance, and they don't believe the personal is political. They can separate the two. And so I think long term, for governing, I think that's going to be a problem for Democrats.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think David Shor's data shows that Republican elites are kind of socially moderate and, but really right wing on economics. And while Democratic elites are left wing, I think, on economics, but also very left wing on culture, right? And so that's like a structural difference between the two parties.
Yeah. So one of the advantages I discovered, and this was now 30 years ago, but being someone who was not progressive, I mean, I was libertarian. I was like capital L libertarian in college, but like
many such cases.
Yeah. I've chilled over time. Like, okay, maybe we don't need to have the heroin in the candy aisle at the 7-Eleven. Like, some regulation's good. But you cannot survive at Yale University as a capital L libertarian without learning how to play the game. And I also think if you're at all open-minded, you can't survive because you can't be constantly challenged and not find like genuine problems in, I think, any philosophy. So one of the advantages that Republicans and conservatives has is that the people who come out, like they speak the language and understand the arguments of the other side. And they know their steel man arguments, right? Like they know the arguments that they can give that are like the absolute strongest. That's something that I think a lot of people on the far left don't have because they go to their blank studies program and they don't really necessarily affiliate with the jocks and the center right people on campus. And so there's almost this straw man version of reality of what the right is that they accept, and it makes their ability to persuade a broader swath of people once they get into the real world very much diminished.
So it's a bubble world. The bubble world is a real problem for them.
It is. It's twofold. Like, yes, it's a bubble world for them, but like, if you're a college-educated Republican, or conservative or libertarian or whatever, like, you've had to have a foot in the bubble. Like, you've had to step into their bubble, hear what they have to say and understand it. Like, be able to write the paper for the professor that speaks that language, that knows the things you have to concede, and yet still be able to step out of the bubble into the real world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there was like a paper, like it's like almost 15 years ago. I think Jonathan Haidt. It's like liberals, like ideological liberals, tended to think that ideological, like conservatives were evil.
Yeah.
Whereas like conservatives tended to think liberals were wrong.
Right.
So
well, if your worldview, like one of that kind of radical social justice worldview we've been talking about, like a big part of that is that the personal is political. Like everything you do in your life, if you watch the Super Bowl, like that is a political statement somehow. And so if your worldview is really that totalizing, like it's impossible to just see people as wrong because you think that everything they do has moral weight attached to it. Whereas if you're a conservative, you're like, well, okay, go to your Take Back the Night march. Like, I don't like rape. Like, I don't think this is an effective form of protest, but do your thing.
Well, okay, so pivoting to conservatives, like as we're recording this, and so this will hopefully come out in, weeks to the point where like, we will have some distance from it, but I do want to ask you, so just, Heritage Foundation is roiling right now with like, arguments about anti-Semitism and Groyperism and all this stuff. And that was triggered by Tucker Carlson, as, social justice person would say, platforming Nick Fuentes. I'll be honest, I don't really care that Nick was on Tucker's show. My issue is that Tucker is a very influential person with mainstream connections, including to Heritage, and also a friend of J.D. Vance. His son is chief of staff for J.D. Vance. But seemed like a very softball interview, and he seemed to really like Nick. And the problem with Nick Fuentes is he is a Holocaust denier and an anti-Semite. So,
Right.
laying all that out, this has blown up at Heritage. And, my friend Rod Dreher gave a quote, I think, to Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times that 30 to 40% of Republican staffers on the Hill are groypers. I don't think that's true, but what do you have any takes on this? Like, what's your opinion? About this sort of stuff. Like, what is the issue with the Republican staffing class?
Yeah, you have. I think what I don't. I would be surprised by 30 to 40%
Yeah.
of vipers. And maybe I'm just deluding myself, but
Yeah.
I think what has happened is because I teach classes at Ohio State, and the center right students tend to gravitate to me because they know that I'm open to their ideas and it's not going to be hostile. And there has been an evolution, and this is kind of consonant with Trump's presidency, that like the Democrats don't throw their bad actors under the bus. Why should we throw ours under the bus?
Yeah.
And I think some of the fight some of the they seem to be gripers is more like we're just not backing down, like we're not tossing anyone under the bus. Which I kind like, and you can see that with Jay Jones, right? Like the guy fantasizes about like shooting his political opponents, and like he doesn't get thrown off. The Justin Fairfax, the old lieutenant governor of Virginia, gets accused twice of rape, doesn't get impeached. I see where they come from, but at the same time, there's a difference between that, I think, and he's a Holocaust denier. We all have our foibles. Let's talk about some other aspects of your ideas. Like that's really dangerous. You can't just like deny someone's Holocaust denialism, I guess. And that I agree with you. That's what's so offensive about Carlson is that it's fine. You have Nick Fuentes on, but you can't just give him a softball interview if you don't want people to think like you're friendly to him.
Well, I think at some point in like first 30 minutes, he was like, it was kind of like he almost said like, so tell me what happened to you, young man. I'm just like, like his cancellation story. And I'm like, bro, I Nick Fuentes clips for 9 years. Like he has not evolved or changed in certain particular ways. Okay. And like one particular way is he does not like the Jews. And he's very clear about it. And he has said, genocidal things. So, obviously that's why it was going to blow up. I think, Richard Dick Hanania has been like writing a lot and like been in the media being quoted about the based ritual and all these things. And obviously the right has its own, youth radicalism. I will say though, I was in DC during inauguration week, just hanging out with my friends, mostly MAGA adjacent type people. And I told one of them, he's just turned 25, so pretty young. And I was like, bro, that if you talk to like a normal Republican in rural Virginia about your views, they'd be like, you're crazy. Just like the Democrat staffing class have their own little bubble. There is a bubble where, the Republican, staffing class, Republican young elites, maybe. I don't know if we want to call them elites, but, they're kind of like got some crazy views here.
Yeah.
And normal Americans of whether they're Democrat or Republican would be freaked out, I think. And they just got to be real about that.
Yeah, I mean, so part of it is too. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and so not in DC, and I live kind of a my closest attachment to DC is through AEI, which is sort of like anti-Trump central. So I don't get a lot of interaction with that, and I don't go to a lot of, for whatever reason, like I don't really talk politics that much when I go to events here. So there may well be something like very dark happening with young thought leaders on the right that I'm just oblivious to.
Yeah. So, I want to ask you about the future. Speaking of young thought leaders, I guess he's not a thought leader anymore. He's, vice president. 2028, we're recording at the end of 2025. And, I'm starting to get really like the tendrils of lame duck going on here because, like, Trump has 3 more years, probably will lose the midterms for the House,
Yeah.
and then probably be mired by investigations and an impeachment, if I had to bet, So, I think people are going to be like thinking up to 2028. JD Vance is vice president, so obviously, barring unforeseen circumstances, he will be the heir apparent. Rubio has, he's not an immigrant, but he's like Latin American immigrants that work like long hours at a lot of jobs. He's kind of fitting the stereotype there. I think he has like 3 positions or something. he's, he's obviously going to be like a potential candidate. I mean, the Republicans have like these young, guys who are going to be, of the right age, with the right experience now, scrambling for 2028, and they're going to try to take over a movement that is associated with, frankly, a cult of personality of Donald J. Trump. The whole thing is just, I think, something that we haven't seen. Because, Reagan was as big as Trump, but like he was a very conventional person in terms of just like kind of disappearing after his term. I don't think Trump's going to disappear. And also, Reagan was attached in a symbiotic way with a conservative movement that kind of created him, whereas Trump just kind of like has created MAGA de novo just himself, right?
Right.
So, like, what are your thoughts about what's going to happen after Trump officially exits the stage, and who's going to take over? Like, I don't know. What's the new ideology? What's the new Republican Party going to be like?
I think Vance. If Trump wants Vance to be the Republican nominee, Vance will be the Republican nominee. I mean, barring some catastrophic falling out with Trump and his base, which, I mean, after 12 years, I just don't see it happening. But beyond that, like, Trumpism without Trump has been like the GOP's white whale, like trying to find a candidate who doesn't have Trump's personal foibles, doesn't, do the over the line things that Trump does, and yet, can appeal to the, appeals to strippers. I love that story, by the way, like that just encapsulates so much.
It's a true story.
Yeah, I believe it. It makes perfect sense.
I wouldn't have believed it before it happened.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Like, I'm skeptical it can work.
I'm not sure JD would appeal to her, that woman. I mean, I don't know her anymore. I mean, I met her once, but he doesn't have that kind of celebrity.
Yeah, and Trump's like a little bit of a bad boy, right? A lot of a bad boy. And JD Vance is like a choir boy who tries to be a bad boy. And I don't want to, like, obviously he served tours of duty in Iraq and, but he just doesn't come off the same way. So I don't know. I think the Republicans have a problem similar, and actually to a greater extent that Democrats had with Obama, which is that like a lot of the appeal really was just personal. And it's going to be really hard. The story I tell is during presidential elections, when you drive around rural Ohio, you see the house that you always think like, God, who lives there? Like, that house will have Trump signs all over it. Like, that'll be the house lit up. And I just don't see them lighting it up with Vance signs, because I think they genuinely are Trump voters.
Well, I mean, and also part of the issue with Vance is he's so protean. He was a never Trumper in 2016, and then kind of started evolving in various ways. So he joined the movement. He wasn't there at the beginning. There are people at the beginning. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I kind of know, like, there are some people that are still like a little bit suspicious of him because he wasn't there at the beginning. On the other hand, I have friends who are like very hardcore MAGA who've been with Trump since 2015, and they're very close to JD Vance. So I think they're convinced that, JD is with the movement. He's not faking it. He's not going to like become like a fusionist. He was never really like that much of a fusionist anyway. Like the libertarianism was never a big thing for him.
Yeah.
His populism. It was like a softer, gentler populism. Now it's a harder edge populism. So I think like, so that's probably true. JD's probably, it's his to lose as far as the nomination goes. What do you think about the Democrats? Because again, like speaking as a Gen X person, I remember like 1990, 91, I was a little kid, not little, but I was like watching like TV and stuff. And they had no idea. They were like, oh, it's definitely going to be Mario Cuomo. He's going to be the nominee. And then like, it was like Clinton and like 13 other people, and like it wasn't clear that Bill Clinton was at all going to be the nominee. He kind of just came out of nowhere, right? And
Yeah.
so I always tell people like, don't think it's going to be Gavin or someone that like it could be like someone totally out of left field. So what do you think?
Yeah, I would not even, I would not even begin to guess who the nominee is. I mean, I think because of how the primary calendar is set up, if Harris wants it, like being able to start out in South Carolina is going to be a big boost for her, the state with a huge Black population. Although that doesn't mean they're going to line up behind Harris. It's just a boost. If she doesn't run, though, I mean, it's wide open. And the Democrats, I think, they are led by a faction that doesn't think of themselves as a faction. And maybe most don't, but, the kind of white progressive social justice type, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world. And I don't think they realize how much of a faction they are. And so I could see someone like Pete Buttigieg, who has who is the epitome of that managerial class, Harvard-educated white voter, getting the nomination and then just utterly falling flat on their face, because the successful Democratic nominees are like the Bill Clintons and the Obamas and the Bidens are the ones who can speak the language of that class, but also relate to working class voters, to minority voters, to other portions of the coalition. I think there's a real danger that the nominee I think Harris had this problem that she leans in very well with single white women, or single women in general, and professionally educated women, but the connection with other portions of that coalition were just really light.
Yeah. It seems like, on the social issues, the Democrats are like, dominated by the, most liberal 25th percentile of the population. So, Spamberger, who's a moderate Democrat, CIA background, she could not kind of go off the reservation on the trans issue in particular. And that's kind of an 80-20 issue, a lot of the trans stuff, like the sports. And so for some reason, they just can't like move away from that. But that like puts them at a handicap, right? Like they just get no flexibility.
Yeah, it really does. It's weird because when I grew up, it was always the GOP that had the like wrong side of emerging. So like maybe marriage equality was working to their advantage for a couple of cycles, but they always found themselves on the wrong side and unable to disengage. And Democrats are kind of in a similar spot, I think, where there are just these issues that are radioactive to a lot of people, that they just can't let go of. They can't let go of even for like 4 to 8 years and to see if society changes their views.
Yeah. Well, actually, but the polling, I mean, it's still tentative. Polling is suggesting that society is actually like that peaked around like 2019 or so.
Yeah.
In terms of like acceptance of truth and all these things.
Yeah, it's interesting. So like the gay marriage kind of marriage equality kind of came on the scene when I was just graduating college. And I'm convinced the reason it ultimately succeeded is Ellen DeGeneres and Will and Grace, right? Because the face of the gay rights movement changed from being like ACT UP throwing down communion wafers to this is just your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
These are just people who are virtually normal, who want to live life and form marriages. And it's almost a small c conservative argument. And the trans rights movement seems to be going in the exact opposite direction. It's not like we just want to. I mean, Brianna Wu, I love her on Twitter. She's very good about it. She's like, I just want healthcare. I just want to live my life and hang out with my husband. I don't want to compete in your sport. And it's just remained in this very activist. It's remained in like 1980s gay rights activist mode. Yeah,
radical overturning of society. Well, yeah, and I think what you're alluding to here, because like we're not that far apart in age, is like in the 1990s, gay lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, was mainstreamed, and it was basically like we're just like you, we just happen to be of the same sex, know, and that's an easy pitch to make, and they're like, we just want the rights that you have. That's it, and then obviously it's like, well, if our partner is like in the hospital, we can't visit. if, we don't get the approval of the family. Okay, like these are very, very straightforward things. When it comes to the trans thing, as I alluded to earlier, like I can tell you, just talk to baby boomers, they still don't know which one is which. For example, like what's a trans woman, what's a trans man? They don't know like which direction, and all these things. It's like I think that there's conceptual barriers to that because it's not like just a modification on a pre-existent framework. It is actually like a totally different framework to understand gender. And honestly, I'm not sure if like a lot of liberals totally understand it either. They just know what they're supposed to say. And I think that's part of the problem because they can't make a very strong, forceful argument for something that they themselves are a bit tentative about. And I don't think with marriage equality, with, gay marriage, whatever you want to call it, I don't think anyone was like unclear or tentative of what it was. It was very straightforward, right? Like you have the same rights that a straight couple would have. Like, okay, you agree or you disagree.
Yeah. No, the modern trans movement, you kind of have to buy into the deconstructing of gender, right? Like, and that's a mouthful of a term, just me saying it. You and I know what that means, but like trying to explain it to my parents, it's like glazing over. And then they're like, well, I don't want to deconstruct gender. Like, I think a man and a woman is the same. Like like gay marriage just requires you to be like, okay, go live your life. Whereas trans rights requires pretty fundamental rethinking of reality and your relationship to it.
Well, okay, we're gonna close out, but I will say like, I'm not gonna say who it is. People who are in the know can probably guess. Okay, there is a case if there's a pundit who is a lesbian, was a lesbian, and their wife transitioned to be a man. And so people were just like, wait a second, are they straight now?
I mean,
These sorts of like I'm laughing because it's like, okay, what? Like this is like you're doing mental operations. It's like algebra, and you don't want people to be doing algebra. That's the frustrating.
yeah, I mean, I think Chastity Bono or Chaz Bono had a similar situation, and you kind of chuckle about it, like, okay, this is really weird, but then you really start like drilling down and thinking about it, and it's like there's actually some pretty serious like foundational concepts, in a way that there's not when you're just like, look, if you want to marry your boyfriend, like go live your life, be happy together. I like you. I want you to be happy. Like it's just
for sure.
It's a different worldview.
Yeah. Well, I think I've taken up enough of your time. I hit all the questions that I was going to hit. I really appreciate talking to you, Sean. I really love your social media and just like, data-driven analyses. I've admired your work for, probably like 15 years now. I've followed you. So it's been great talking to you. I did get a Kindle copy of your book, so I'll check that out. And I guess I will see you online.
Absolutely. I look forward to interacting with you there. Your Twitter is just fascinating, and I will be a subscriber to this podcast.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to add you to my comped list.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Bye.
This podcast for kids